Indiana, and tonight Corey Johnson is scheduled to be executed by the federal government. And I'm in a conversation across this table at a Bob Evans restaurant with Bill Breeden. Bill is the spiritual advisor for Corey Johnson. I met with him this morning, and I wanted to let you all in on what's going on and what's happening. So I will flip my camera around, put my mask back on. So this is Bill. And we're going to have some food showing up at some point, no, so this is going to be curious. So Bill, you met this morning with Corey, right, just up the street here. I mean, it's something kind of odd and bizarre about the fact that a mile up the road, there's a federal prison where they're going to execute a person today. They've executed Lisa Montgomery 2 nights ago, scheduled to execute Dustin Higgs tomorrow, and 10 other people they executed this summer under the command of the...
That's right, 11 actually. It'll be 13 total.
And then right down the road, we're sitting here at a Bob Evans.
I know.
And we're going to have lunch, which is part of the surreal nature of all this. And
it is.
You're a Unitarian minister, but you also met with Corey today. And can you just tell us what's happening there and what's going on?
Well, of course, the scheduled execution is at 6 o'clock this evening. I have to go into the prison at 3:45, or meet to be taken into the prison. And then we're waiting. Right now, there's an injunction. A judge has delayed the executions for 90 days till March 16th. But of course, we fully expect the BOP to appeal that all the way to the Supreme Court. The injunction is based on the fact that both Corey and Dustin have advanced COVID cases, and Corey, I've noticed him getting worse over the last 2 weeks that I've seen him. And so that there's evidence from pulmonologists and others that's been filed with the court that shows that when you have damaged lungs, which 80% of COVID patients do, when you have lungs damaged to that extent, when the poison hits the lungs, they will experience, I think it's called edema. It's a bleeding. The lungs will start to fill up with blood. And the doctors, the specialists have said it'll be several minutes of extreme torture before he dies. And so the judge has ruled on the basis of the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment to delay the executions for 90 days to let the COVID clear up if it does. And of course, if we just get a delay for a week, we feel like that this
because then the Biden administration will set aside federal executions. And for people who don't know, these are federal executions, which is why we're in Indiana.
That's right. This is the only federal death row in America.
And it's where all these federal death row inmates are.
All male federal death row inmates. They keep the female inmates, which we only had one, and she was kept in Ohio and Texas part of the time. But they moved her here for the execution.
And the Trump administration, as I mentioned, has reinstated the use of the death penalty after a 17-year moratorium just this summer. Now, in his final days in office, his Justice Department is pursuing these executions, feeling like they're rushing them at the end of his.
Oh yeah, no question. And
so you were with Corey this morning. A lot of us, can't imagine sitting with someone guilty of the kinds of crimes that he's guilty of, and so many of us feel that the death penalty is the wrong way to go. But what is it like for you to be in that intimate space with someone who's been in solitary confinement for 29 years? Another thing that you taught me yesterday was that these inmates in federal are kept in solitary confinement. Corey Johnson's been kept in solitary confinement for 29 years.
29 years, 23 and a half hours a day. They get out, supposed to get out a half hour a day. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, sometimes they choose not to go out at all. So he's been, and he's been here for 29 years without a single visitor, except for the occasional lawyer that comes in to discuss his case with him. But his family just couldn't afford to make the trip to Indiana. They're all from New York, D.C. And so he's had 29 years. I was his first visitor in 29 years. And somewhat by chance that I am a spiritual advisor because I've been at every execution that the federal government has done at this institution since it opened, with the exception of two this last fall when I injured myself and couldn't come out. But I've protested every one of them from Tim McVeigh on. And I am a spiritual advisor to another man on death row, Chad Folks, who doesn't have a date. I've been seeing him once a month for about 13 years. I really didn't know what I'd find. When Orlando Hall was executed, I was here, and a lawyer friend of mine was with me, and we had three to go. Liz Montgomery, who they killed Tuesday, first woman in 73 years, who was clearly insane. The crime. Anybody who reads the crime.
Chicken salad.
Anyone who. Thank you. Our food's coming here.
Yeah.
Anyone who reads the story of the crime, it's a horrendous crime. It's not an exceptional crime in the sense it's the only one like it. I found out there's actually about 15 or 20 of these a year of this kind of crime. But I'm not going to explain her crime. You can look it up. But anybody who reads about that crime and doesn't think she was insane, I'd say that would mark a person as a dangerous person if that doesn't meet the definition of insanity, which, of course, Trump fits that. But Orlando, after Orlando was executed, I talked with the lawyer and asked her to find out if the other three slated to die had spiritual advisors, and if they didn't, I would volunteer to serve them. And fortunately, I got Orlando Hall. Not Orlando Hall, I got Corey Johnson.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was with some, tremendous shaking, mysterium tremendous or whatever it was that the old theologian used to talk about, with fear and trembling because I've been in solitary myself a few times, and I know this short-term solitary affected me. 29 years of solitary, I can't even begin to imagine. And as I've told you, I didn't know whether I'd find a Renfield character from the Dracula movie, and they're catching flies, and I had no idea what I'd find. I just felt like my belief is that one of the greatest gifts of life is to die in the presence of someone who cares for you. And when I found out that Corey did not have anyone, because only a minister can be in the execution chamber. And to tell you about his integrity, here's a man's 52 years old. He's 29 years in solitary confinement. He's convicted of 7 murders in a drug war. And he was a warrior in a drug war. He's mentally challenged, and he became kind of the enforcer, as sometimes mentally challenged people are. He was big and strong. And he makes no bones about it. He was guilty of 7 murders in a drug war. Ironically, as I told him, tragically ironic that had he killed 17 Iraqis in Baghdad, including children, we could get him a pardon. But he killed the wrong people. And he's very remorseful about that. He's dictated a statement for me to read before he's executed, talk about that. He really is a remarkable human being. I was going to show you the integrity. His lawyer called me and said, I understand you're willing to be a spiritual advisor. And I said, yes. And he said, well, I have to check with Corey because he has to invite you in. You can't just show up. And so he went to see Corey and he said, listen, Corey, I can't be in the chamber with you. He said, I really think it would help you if you had someone in there who cared for you, who wasn't being paid to kill you, who wasn't employed by the government who's going to kill you, but somebody who was there just to serve you. And so he said, you need to, when Corey came to prison, you fill out a religious affiliation form so you can have a minister visit you.
Yeah.
And he put on his religion none. And so the lawyer said, your paper says none, like he can't come in like that. You have to get that paper back from the chapel and you have to change it to Unitarian.
So that your religious affiliation matches his.
Unitarian matches his. So Corey said, well, I can't do that. And Don says, well, why? And he said, oh, it would be a lie. I don't even know what a Unitarian is. He said, I'm not going to lie. I don't have a religion. So And finally, Don convinced him, look, this is just a bureaucratic hoop. I really think it would help you to have someone with
He's a
you.
Unitarian now.
Yeah, Unitarian. And so, interestingly, when I first applied to be a minister of record 14 years ago for Chad Folks, Chad told the chaplain at that time, a very fundamentalist chaplain, that he had invited a Unitarian minister to be his minister. And the chaplain said, you need to get somebody else. Unitarians don't believe in God, they believe in crystal balls.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell the chaplain, I don't have crystal balls and I don't tinkle when I walk. But we came to terms and I got in. And but Corey changed his line to Unitarian, so I did get in 2 weeks ago or so. I spent about 26, counting today, probably close to 30 hours with Corey. One of the most remarkable human beings I've met in my life. The most honest I've met. I mean, Corey says exactly what he thinks and feels, and he doesn't. Many of his family are evangelical Christians and are very concerned, as many are, about what happens when they die. And I'm honest about that. I have no idea, and it doesn't really. That's not a question I even ask. But I told one of the family members called and asked, has he accepted Jesus? And I said, that's not my question to ask or to answer. You can ask Corey when you see him. But I said, what my feeling is, if there's not room in the heart of God for Corey, there's not room in the heart of God for me either. And Corey is okay. And Corey is okay. He's an amazing young man. His writing and writing skills in particular is probably about a third grade level. His reading skills are not great. He is reading the Psalms now, and he said this morning, I look to the hills, which comes my help. He reads that every night before he goes to bed now. And he's just a wonderful human being.
And you mentioned he has a very bright mind and very smart.
He really does. And, the problem with Corey, and one of the reasons I think that the lawyers have never really wanted media to interview him, because he comes off as being, his conversation skills are impeccable, beautiful. He can express himself very well. But he does have a learning disability, and he is intellectually disabled. But you couldn't prove it by sitting down and talking to him.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that people do with the death penalty is they just treat the inmate, the criminal, as if they're a criminal, an inmate, and not human.
That's
right?
exactly right.
And for you to sit there with him and know him as a person and to share a bit of that now, I think is the important part. Like, if we're going to have the death penalty in this country, which I wish we wouldn't, we need to be reminded that these are people killing another person.
Absolutely.
Not the government killing a criminal. Like, we do a funny thing with language to get ourselves out of it, right?
It's not an execution, it's murder.
Yeah.
And when they get the death certificate, on the death certificate, it'll say homicide.
Say homicide, yeah.
I met a
justifiable homicide or some kind.
Just say homicide is what it says. I met a woman from Georgia who had two sons. One was killed in gang violence, the other was executed by the state of Georgia. She got both death certificates, showed them to me. Both of them say homicide. Homicide. And the death penalty, the building where they execute people in Georgia, has a sign outside that's called the Classification and Diagnostic Center. And I say they classify you as worthless and diagnose you as dead. Yeah. But it's great euphemism of fascism,
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Play with the language.
Yeah. But I think that Corey is, we hope that there is an injunction right now because of the COVID and because of the cruel and unusual punishment that a judge has agreed with pulmonologist reports that because of lung damage with COVID, that if you inject him with poison, that he will suffer long minutes of severe suffering as soon as that poison hits his lungs because of edema and bleeding in the lungs. So thankfully we have right now an injunction that postpones the election of Dustin, Higgs, and Corey until March 16th.
But that could be overturned. The thought is that the Supreme Court could overturn that tonight, and they press forward. If so, you'll be with him again this afternoon. You'll go in again if the execution goes forward.
I'll execute him, and
now I heard with Lisa Montgomery, the spiritual advisor, they didn't let her spiritual
That's what
advisor
I
in 2
understand.
days ago. Is
That's
that?
what
Do you think that could happen with you?
I
Is there a
don't think
chance?
so. I've talked to the lawyer, and Corey talked to the chaplain this morning, or yesterday, and as far as we know, I'm going to be allowed in. If not,
Well, on behalf of all of us, Bill, thank you for making the human connection here.
yeah. Yeah, you know, I drafted a Sunni Muslim friend that just met him over this issue. They called me for Orlando Hall, who was converted to Islam, and he wanted a Sunni Muslim. So I called a mosque in Bloomington and said, "Can you find somebody that can do this?" An IU business professor named Yusuf Amir, a wonderful man. First time I ever met him, he came to my house and we sat for 3 hours around the lake. And I said, "Look, this is what I need." I said, "If you accept this, you may be asked to be in the death chamber with me. And I'll certainly understand if you feel like that you can't do it. I won't disrespect you." And he said, "Well, how could I say no? It's a chance to serve." And he experienced that. And he is also going to be with Dustin Higgs. In fact, after he came out of Orlando Halls, he told me that night that that one didn't happen until after midnight. And he came out and he said, I don't think I could ever do this again. It's the worst experience of my life.
Wow.
But he's doing it again.
And you are too.
I am, and I've never done it before. I work 50, 60 hours a week at night to go to college and seminary to be a minister. I never had a class on how to prepare a person to be murdered and how to stand there and watch it be done. I helped hundreds of people prepare to die, but I've never helped anybody prepare to get murdered. And I don't.
Well, God bless Corey, and God bless you.
Well, thank you. And I speak to all the people who may see this. Thank you for resisting the death penalty. We're going to win this. We are going to win this. It may not be in time for Corey, but as I told Corey, you're going to be a part of changing this nation.
And may he be one of the last.
Yes,
if it happens at all.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You better eat before your food gets cold. Mine's cold.
All right, just so all of you, we'll be live streaming these same channels tonight, deathpenaltyaction.org, where you can find petitions around this execution and others. So please go to deathpenaltyaction.org. And thanks for your care and concern about this issue of life and justice.